If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com. HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. It is such a pleasure and a zchut, a merit, to record the stories every week. This week I have for you two stories. But before we begin, I want to dedicate this podcast episode to the continued success, Be'ezrat Hashem, of our soldiers in battle wherever they are. May Hashem keep them safe from harm and help them to be successful in their missions. The returning of all the hostages, whole, healthy, and alive. Be'ezrat Hashem. The refuah shlema, the full recovery of everyone who's been injured or who is ill. The comforting of those that lost loved ones. And the continued unity of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel and all around the world. This week was the yahrzeit of Reb Shlomo Carlebach, who was the rabbi of my rabbi, even though I never met Shlomo personally. Through my rabbi, Reb Sholem Brat, of blessed memory, I have a connection to Reb Shlomo. So one more thing before I begin, I want to share a short Torah from Reb Shlomo, who he said, what's the difference between a rabbi and a rebbe? So everybody knows, when you're traveling and you get lost in the days before Waze, you would go to a gas station and ask directions. And Reb Shlomo said, that's a rabbi. You don't know which way to go. You ask directions from a rabbi, and he tells you how to get there. He said, so what's a rebbe? He said, a rebbe, you go to the gas station and he fills up your tank with gas. So that's the difference between a rabbi and a rebbe. And that's hopefully what these stories are doing for you. At least they do for me. Sometimes they give us direction, but mainly they fill up our tanks so we can keep on going. So here's a story that Reb Shlomo used to tell. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, the Rimanover Rebbe, who lived from 1745 to 1815 and passed away in Rimanov in Poland, was one of the great Rebbes. By the way, there's a living Rimanover Rebbe today, and several years ago he came to Jerusalem. They put signs all around the city. The Rimanover Rebbe is here. Anybody who would like to meet him, contact us. And I went to meet the Rimanover Rebbe, a very sweet and special man. But this is probably his great-grandfather, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov. And the Rimanover's father was a very simple man. And the question is asked, how does such a simple person merit to have a son like the Rimanover Rebbe, such a great tzaddik? And there are many stories that have been told, and here's one of the versions. Rabbi Menachem Mendel's father was very poor, but every person, my sweetest friends, even the poorest, one day has a day in their life when the gates of heaven are open for them, and they can make money, and they can grow spiritually, rich in both ways. And on that particular day, gates were open to Rabbi Menachem Mendel's father. So Reb Mendel, his father, he heard that there was a person who had gone bankrupt and needed to sell his house. And if he could only get a hold of the money, Reb Mendel, his father, could buy a huge house with land and fields and forests and rivers, and he would be able to support his family living off the land for the rest of their lives. The only thing is, he needed 10,000 rubles. So he started going around to people that he knew and collected money, telling them that he wanted to buy this house. And after he bought the house, he would have the land and then be able to support his family. And as he came to each person, he would explain to them that he wanted to buy this estate. And they looked at Reb Mendel, his father, and they saw that he was an honest man, and they lent him the money. And after a couple of days, he actually had 10,000 rubles in his hand. And that was all he needed. So he's on his way to finalize the deal, an investment that would make him rich overnight. But do you know, my friends, from listening to these stories, that in those days, if a person didn't pay their rent, and the rent was due yearly, and if several years passed and somebody didn't pay the rent, then the landowner would take something as collateral. And as Reb Mendel, his father, was going towards the estate to purchase the house, he sees a Goyish landowner with a little boy and a little girl chained to either side of his wagon, like two little slaves. And it was heartbreaking. The nobleman was shouting at the children. The children were crying, terrified of what would happen to them. And Reb Mendel, his father, he stops the landowner. He says, "What's going on here? What did these children ever do to you?" And he said, "Their father hasn't paid my rent in 3 years. So I'm taking his children and I'm going to sell them as slaves. And at least I'll make back a little bit of my money. And that Jew will suffer for not paying me. So Reb Mendel's father says, and how much does he owe? The landowner says, why, you have some money? He says, yeah, how much do they owe? So the landowner says, 10,000 rubles. And Reb Mendel's father says, would you be willing to sell them to me for 10,000 rubles? He says, sure. If you have the money in cash, you'll save me the trouble of going to the marketplace. So Reb Mendel's father hands over 10,000 rubles. The money that he had borrowed to buy the estate that was going to make him rich and take him out of all of his troubles. And the landowner sets the children free. Reb Mendel's father makes sure that they make it home safely. The parents can't thank him enough. But now, what was he going to do? How would he tell his wife what he had done, yet alone that he'd paid it with 10,000 rubles that he borrowed from their neighbors and friends? Reb Mendel's father said, not only am I not richer now, but now I owe so much money. It's more money than I would make an entire lifetime, and I have no way to pay it back. It was clear to him now that he was going to end up a slave himself if he didn't pay back his loans. And Reb Mendel's father was so distraught he didn't know what to do. He knew he did something good, but now what? Now he has to deal with reality. 10,000 rubles was a fortune, and he had borrowed it for a purpose, not just to save these children. He couldn't go back home and face his wife, so he went to the Beit Midrash, the house of study. He sat down and opened a sefer, a holy book, and started learning. And even though the book was open in front of him, he was lost in thought, couldn't concentrate on his learning. And then another Jew enters into the Beit Midrash. He looked like a very wealthy Jew, dressed in fancy clothes, fancy jewelry. Obviously, he was a businessman, a traveling businessman. And this wealthy-looking Jew sits across from Reb Mendel's father. He takes out a Gemara, a Talmud, and he starts to learn. And from time to time, he would look up over the book at Reb Mendel's father. And then he would go back to his learning. And then he'd look up again and go back to his learning. And at some point he said, I can see that you're not actually learning. You're just sitting there, and your thoughts are racing everywhere. What's going on? Share your problem with me. And Reb Mendel's father said, no, it's nothing. Don't worry about it, I'm fine. And the wealthy Jew says, tell me, please, maybe I can help you. So Reb Mendel's father, the truth was, he needed to speak with someone. And who better than this Jew sitting across from him? So he says, tell me what's going on. And Reb Mendel's father said, well, I borrowed 10,000 rubles to buy an estate that was going to make me rich with these huge lands and all the animals and trees and everything there. But on the way to purchase the estate, I saw these two Jewish children and I freed them for 10,000 rubles. And I know it's the right thing to do, but now how am I ever going to pay back this money? And also I'm poor when I could have been wealthy. So the wealthy Jew says, I don't see any problem here. And Reb Mendel's father says, what problem do you not see? He said, well, I will give you the 10,000 rubles right now in cash. And you can go buy the estate. And with the money that you make, you can pay back the original 10,000. And Reb Mendel's father says, and what's the catch? He said, well, there's only one catch. You're going to sell me the mitzvah of buying those two children out of slavery. You'll give it to me in exchange for the 10,000 rubles. And Reb Mendel's father said, are you out of your mind? You want to buy my mitzvah for 10,000 rubles? No way, I can't do that. So both of them went back to learning. Reb Mendel's father not really learning. And the wealthy Jew, yes, actually learning. But the wealthy Jew could see that Reb Mendel's father was still distressed. And then the rich man said, listen, I'm a businessman. I make deals for a living. And I see an opportunity here. You're in need of money. And I would like to buy a mitzvah, specifically that one. I mean, who gets the zchut of doing a mitzvah like that? It's well worth it for me. So you don't want to sell me the whole mitzvah? No problem. He says, so sell me half the mitzvah. I'll still give you the 10,000 rubles. Just give me half. I'll sign a paper. And Reb Mendel's father said, no, I can't do it. It's not the right thing to do. To give up a mitzvah for money? So the wealthy Jew says, fine, a quarter of the mitzvah. You give me 1/4 of the mitzvah. We'll sign a paper. I'll give you the 10,000 rubles. You get 75% of the mitzvah, and you get out of your troubles. And Reb Mendel's father says, listen, I know you really want to help me, and I really appreciate it. And your offer is very generous, but I can't do it. And they continued learning and negotiating, and eventually the stranger closed his book, stood up, and he points his finger at Reb Mendel's father and he says, this is your last chance. I'm giving you one last chance. I want 1% of the mitzvah. Just 1%. You'll have 99% left for the world to come. I'll give you 10,000 rubles for 1% of the mitzvah. And Reb Mendel's father simply shook his head no. He couldn't do it. And the wealthy Jew got up to leave. But just when he reached the door, he turned around and he said, I want you to know that I am Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Navi, and I come when all the gates of heaven are open. Specifically for you, the gates were open to test your goodness. And when you gave up your chance for making a fortune and pulling yourself out of poverty in order to save those children, there was a storm in heaven. Because whenever something really good happens, the Sitra Achra, the negative energy, is invited to come down and knock down the good deed that a person did, causing the person to have doubts or ego or regret. And the negative energy in heaven said that you're a fake, that you did the mitzvah but you didn't really mean it. And so I was sent down to test you so that I could prove to the negative energy that you really were doing it only for Hashem without any regrets. And so Eliyahu Navi said to Reb Mendel's father, for giving up all hope of ever being wealthy in this world in order to save another person's children and then not selling your mitzvah even for 1%, you brought such joy to Hashem that I want to bless you with a son that will bring light to the world. And of course that son was none other than the great tzaddik, Reb Menachem Mendel of Rimenov. And that's not an easy test to stand up to, my friends. I think I would have taken the deal for the 1%. I don't know. Reb Mendel's father must have been a very righteous man. Bezat Hashem, when we're tested, may Hashem bless us to pass the test with joy and with no regrets. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemo Sherit Yisrael, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan Yisrael, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan Yisrael, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan, Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, La la la, ya la la, ya la la, I have another story for you. It was the custom of the first Belzer Rebbe, known as the Sar Shalom, Shalom Rukeach, who lived from 1781 to 1855 and passed away in Belz. It was a tradition that he would give blessings to young women on the day of their marriage. There was a farmer who went with his daughter and his future son-in-law to visit the Belzer Rebbe in order to get the blessing before the wedding. And as they were setting out, the tavern keeper's wife said, and don't forget to ask the Rebbe that we earn a decent living and that we should bring up our children to Torah and mitzvot and not have any problems from them, chas v'shalom, God forbid. And the horses were already ready to go. And even though they started going, the wife ran after her husband and said, and another thing, don't forget to ask that the cows should give plenty of milk. In the harvest, don't forget him to pray that the next harvest should have a good profit. And as the wagon rolled out of sight, the husband was simply focused on reaching the Rebbe, getting the blessing, and coming back in time for the wedding the next day. And eventually they arrived in Belz, and when the father was standing in front of the Rebbe, he began his list of requests. A blessing that the young couple have parnasa, livelihood, and shalom bayit, peace at home, and healthy children, and good health for themselves. And he's going on. And the Belzer Rebbe said, the right thing for a man going out on a journey should be to confess his sins. But the farmer didn't pay any attention. He said, and the cows, and the milk, and the harvest, and then the Belzer Rebbe said, really, a person going out on a journey like you are should confess his transgressions, whether they were committed intentionally or unintentionally. It is a fitting thing to confess them. And when the Rebbe saw that the farmer simply continued his list, and that the chickens lay eggs, and that the goats also give milk, and that the butter come out right, so the Rebbe said, let me help you with the words of Vidoy. Ashamnu, we've transgressed. Bagadnu, we acted in an unloyal way to Hashem, and so on. But even then, the farmer wasn't listening. He was so busy with his list of things that he didn't hear anything the Rebbe was saying. And with that, the Rebbe remained quiet. And the farmer and his daughter and future son-in-law left the Rebbe and went on their way home. And on their way, they lost their way in the forest, eventually took a turn, and somehow the horses, the wagon, and everything ended up in a deep swamp. The father tried to get out of the wagon, But as soon as he did, he sunk into the mud up to his waist. Then he remembered the words of the tzaddik, and they all started confessing, Ashamnu, Bagadnu. They were crying out from the depths of their hearts, Mima makim karaticha. From the depths we cry out to you, Hashem. And suddenly they heard a non-Jewish wagon driver shouting at his horses, Whoa, whoa! And without saying a word, he attached a thick rope to the wagon. The father grabbed onto the side of the wagon, and with his horses, he pulled them all with the wagon out of the mud. He took them to a nearby inn. They cleaned themselves up, and they thanked this wagon driver who came out of nowhere to save them. And they said to him, Who are you, and where did you come from? And he said, Well, I'll tell you my story. I was once hired by a nobleman to drive his carriage and take care of his horses. And as was my bad luck, one day, 2 of his favorite horses were stolen. And he immediately decided that I had stolen them, and he took me and threw me in his dungeon for a very long time. Then after a few months, he decided it would be better for him to free me so that I could go around all the markets and the fairs and see if I could find his stolen horses. But he didn't just let me go. He sent me with 2 guards that watched me everywhere I went to make sure that I didn't run away. And on the way, I asked one of the guards to let us go to visit the holy man of bells, because people said that he had holy vision and that he could do miracles. And when I told him my whole sad story, he said, If you promise that you will always be friendly to Jews, then in the next few days you will find your horses in the fair in this particular town. And I told him, Yes, of course, Rabbi, I will be good to Jews. And sure enough, I went to that fair, and I waited for the fair to open, and there are the 2 horses. I paid for them and brought them back to my master. And he was so happy for his horses to be back. He gave me a large amount of money, apologized for everything that he had done, and freed me to go on my way. With the amount of money he gave me, I bought a wagon and my own horses, and I do a little farming on the side, and I'm able to make a good living. I've got food, I've got money, and just last night, I was deep in my sleep. And the holy man of bells came to me in a dream, and he said, Do you remember your promise to me? And I was tired. I didn't want to wake up. And he said, You have to get up quickly and go save 3 Jews that are sinking in mud in a swamp. And he told me where to go. And I'll tell you the truth. It was cold and miserable, and my bed was warm, and my house was warm and comfortable. There was no way I was getting out of bed in the middle of the night to help some Jews. But a little while later, when I fell asleep again, the Rebbe came back to me. And he said, They're going to die out there. Do you understand? I told you, you have to go. And then I said in my dream, Yes, Rabbi, right away. I'll go right away. But then I just curled up under my blanket and fell asleep again. This time, the Rebbe came to me again in a dream, and he grabbed my hair and pulled it. And even when I woke up, it felt like the Rebbe was still pulling my hair. And he didn't let me go until I was dressed and in the wagon, galloping towards you. And I went to the place that the Rebbe told me in the dream, and what do I see? The 3 of you sunken in the mud. And so because I saved you, I have now fulfilled my promise to the Rebbe, and I can get on with my life. So thank you for letting me save you. And of course, the father and the children went back home. They had the wedding, and in the middle of the wedding, the father told the story. And he said, There I was in front of the Rebbe, talking about the chickens and the farm, the harvest and the cows. And the Rebbe was trying to tell me, and I didn't hear the message. But Baruch Hashem, the Rebbe truly had holy vision. Because of his vision, we were saved today. May we merit, my sweetest friends, to always pull ourselves and pull one another out of the mud. Ay, la, 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 ay, la, 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 ay, la, la, la.
la la la
Thank you so much for listening, my sweetest friends. I want to thank all the supporters of the podcast, specifically Rabbi Yehuda, who sent in such a beautiful contribution and also beautiful messages. And also to Holy Brother Jason, may Hashem bless them and bless all of you. And thank you to all the contributors and all of the listeners. I hope you have a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful week. And thank you again for listening and for sharing. And I look forward to sharing more stories with you next week, Bezat Hashem. Until then, my sweetest friends, take care of yourselves and sei gesund.